Alright, so in this video we're going to be talking about routing and pathing, which is the worst topic we can possibly discuss in InkStitch. In my opinion, InkStitch does not do this very well at all, but it is a very necessary process nonetheless. So first of all, let's look at the issue with our track and field. So we do have a separate video on creating the track and field text, but let's go into Simulator here. So we're going to go to Extensions and InkStitch and Visualize and Export in Simulator, which I have a keyboard shortcut for, which is Control-Alt-S. And what that does is it shows us how this is going to stitch out. And so we see that at the beginning we had a couple letters stitch out, the R and then the T, and then it stitches from back to front essentially. And so one of the things we need to do is we need to change the order in which this stitches. So that's first step. So we want this to stitch from left to right, and what we have to do is we have to think about how we want this to stitch in order. So what we're going to do is select our vertical part of our T and hold our shift key down and select the top part of our T and then the R. And then from here, we're going to stitch the cross portion of the A. And if you look at embroidered text, it will help you understand how we break up text. So when we do the R, we're going to go to the inside of the A and then the outside of the A. And then we'll go to the C. And then we will go to the vertical part here on the left of the K. And then the other part of the K. Again, I'm holding my shift key down the whole way. Now from K, the next piece that we're going to stitch, I believe we are going to go with the middle part of the ampersand sign, and then the outside of it, and then the inside of our F, and then the outside of our F, and then our I, and then the inside of our E, and then the rest of the E, and then the L, and then the D. So now we've selected those in the order we wish them to stitch. So now we can go to Extensions and InkStitch and Edit, and we can restack the selected objects to the order of the selection. Okay. So now they will stitch all left to right. So let's look at that in Simulator and just make sure that it is going to stitch like we want it to. So we'll start from the beginning here. So there's the vertical part of our T, and then the horizontal, and then the R, and then the A, and then the C, the K, the ampersand sign, the E, or the F, the I, the E, the L, and the D. So now it is stitching in the proper order, but if I click on my info button here, we can see we have 14 thread trims. So if I turn on my frogs, or excuse me, not thread trims, but rather thread jumps. So if I come in here and take a look at my frog, you will see what kind of mess we got going on here. It's pretty substantial with all of these jump stitches going every which way, and that's what we really need to control. So, what do? Well, let's start here at our T. This is a bit of a tedious process, so please bear with me here. But the connection between the T and the R, we want to happen up top here. So this is how we go about doing it. We start here. This is the first piece in the list. We're going to go into params, take a look at that. This is stitching from the top down, so we're going to swap those rails and stitch it from the top up and then choose apply and quit. And then this piece here, we need it to stitch from the left to the right, and it is stitching from left to right, but we also need it to end. You see here it's ending at the bottom, and we need it to end at the top because that's where it's going to connect to the R. You can see that little cursor there. So to do that, we're going to come over here, and it's going to be some combination of these two things, swapping rails or reversing rails. So we're going to start by reversing the first rail, and you can see it's stitching from right to left. So we don't want that because we do need it to stitch from left to right. So now we'll reverse the second rail, and you can see when we do that, that it still ends at the bottom. So we can't have that. Well, what if we were to reverse both rails? Okay, well that's not going to work. So let's go back to reversing the first rail, but also swapping rails. So now you can see it is stitching from left to right, but it's ending at the top. And that's what we need. So we'll hit apply and quit. Now, the R, we need it to end over here on the right. So let's go into params and look at that. Again, I'm using my keyboard shortcut of Control-Alt-P that I set. We're going to choose swap rails. And now you can see it is in fact stitching from left to right, but it's ending on the inside, but we need it to end on the outside. So what we'll do here is we'll go ahead and we have swap rails turned on, but let's go ahead and reverse the first rail. That's not going to work. We need to reverse the second rail. This could potentially work, but it's stitching on the inside. So that's not going to work. So what if we were to reverse both rails? That's not going to work. What if we added, no, that's not going to work either. What if we just reverse the first rail? And yes, it's stitching on the outside. So you can see it's a combination of one of these options here. So we'll go ahead and choose apply and quit at this point. So we have the T and the R. Now, I need to get from the end of this to the beginning of this. So to do that, we're going to select those two pieces, and we're going to go to Extensions, InkStitch, come down here to Tool Stroke, and choose Jump Stitch to Stroke. It's going to bring us up this dialog box, and I use anything greater than 2 millimeters to create a jump. And then I go ahead and leave these options checked, and I go ahead and hit apply, and it will create me a small running stitch. See, there's that small running stitch. So we'll come over here, and I do this every time we add this running stitch. So 0.2, so I can see the actual stitch better. And then, so it's ending here, but we're going to start it over here. And that will give us our connection that we need. Okay. Now, where this ends, we need a connection where this begins. So Control-Alt-J is my keyboard shortcut to get back to that jump stitch. So you can see how using keyboard shortcuts is going to save us a good deal of time. 0.2, so it's ending at the top of the T and beginning at the bottom of the R here. So we will slide that over. And then we just have to tuck this under. Okay, something like that. We can bring this down a little bit. Okay? Because our satin stitch will now cover this running stitch. Okay? So that's taken care of. So then we got to go from our R to our A, but remember we do the inside of our A first. So the first thing we need to do is figure out, well, where is this A? How is this A stitching? So we'll go into params. We need it to go from right to left. And it's going left to right, so we'll swap the rails and go ahead and hit apply and quit. And now we're ready to come from here to here. So let's go ahead and select them both. Go ahead and add our jump stitch. So there's our jump stitch, and then back to 0.2. And we double click to kind of set this up. Whoa. Bring that down, something like that. Now, our A needs to go from left to right. And it's going from right to left. So there we go. There's their A. Okay. And then we need to go from the end of this to the beginning of our A. So we'll add that jump. Okay. Now we have to keep in mind too, as we go through this process, that InkStitch is free. So it's not perfect, but you know, it's pretty good. It's just, you know, this part of it, it's not great. And other programs are better, but they also cost, you know, $1,000 or so. All right, so now we've finished A. Now we need to go to C. Where is C starting from? Doesn't really matter on C where it begins and ends necessarily. It is important for us to know. All right, so that's fine. So it's starting here and coming back and ending at the top, which is perfectly fine. So what we need now is we need the jump from A to C. So let's go ahead and add that and hit apply. So there's our jump from A to C. All right, so we'll double click on it, move this over and down a little bit. We'll do something like that. Okay, so that's fine. Now let's see here how. Now this is a little bit special case in the K. So we have a start point or an end point. Let's see, first of all, let's see where this is starting and stopping. So go into params. Okay, so it's starting from the top, which is fine. That, you know, that aspect of it doesn't really matter. In fact, kind of makes sense. This ends here, so the connector is going to be right here. Okay, but here's where the unique challenge is we've got this situation here. If this stitches from top to bottom, how do we get over to this? And we can't because we're stuck down here. So the way we handle this is with a cut satin. All right. So this there's a variety of ways to do this. I'm going to try and show you both options here. So, but this is you know, to me this is where it does get kind of dicey. It's going to get a little confusing, but bear with me. This is a section you may want to watch a couple of times over. So, what do we deal with cut satins? Now, this is kind of, like I said, this is kind of a unique case, but a very common one where sometimes we need to cut this satin in order to get to a certain spot. So what does that mean? Well, let me try and explain it. So it's going to stitch and it's going to end down here, but we can't have a running stitch over to this other piece. We'd have to have a connector right here. Okay, and we don't really necessarily want that. So the only way around this is to do something different, and that's with cut satin. So we'll go ahead and select this, and I'll show you the first way. So we selected that column. We go to extensions. We come down to InkStitch. We come down to Tool Satin, and there's an option here that says Cut Satin Column. Okay. Now we're going to use that, but in order to use this, we first have to tag where we want our satin column to be. And so to do that, we're going to come up here to Commands, and we're going to choose this option, Attach Commands to Selected Objects. And then you'll see that one of the options here is to Satin Cut Point, use with Cut Satin Column. So we hit that and hit Apply. And there is our satin cut point. So you see it's pointing right to where we want our satin cut point to be. And yes, we want it to be basically right there in the middle. Now that we have that, you see here, there is the cut satin column tag or command. So now that we have that, we can select this, and then we can come up here to extensions, InkStitch, Tool Satin, and that is where we use the cut satin column. You can see it's Shift Alt S is my keyboard shortcut for that. And we click on that, and the software will cut our satin column. Okay, so now this is actually two separate pieces, but they're both satin. Okay, so now what we can do is now, for example, this C ends up top here. So let's see where this piece of satin column, let's see how it stitches. So we'll go into params. One of the things that I don't like that it does when we use that cut satin column option is I don't like the fact that it changes the line width. Now that's, it's a minor thing, but it's just something I just wish it didn't do. So we'll do, all right, so now we just changed our line width basically back to what we already had. So this top piece, let's see how it stitches. Does it stitch from top to bottom? That's the first question. It does, excellent. Now the second piece, we need to stitch from the bottom up. So we'll go back into params on the second piece and see how it's stitching. It's stitching from the top down, so we'll swap those rails. And now it's stitching from the bottom up. Excellent. So now what we need to do is we need to connect our C here. We need to connect it to that first column. Okay, so we do that with our jump stitch. So Control Alt J, apply. So what's going to happen here is this running stitch is going to go to the top of our satin column over like this. So it's going to come over and up, okay? Just like so. But now, when this satin finishes, we need a running stitch down to the bottom of this column. So we'll add another one. Okay. So we will go to point 2. Double click on that. So I'll just move that in, move this in. So this is going to take us to the bottom of this satin column. So that works just fine. And then when this finishes, this needs to go to the top. Let's see how this is stitching. It should be stitching from the top down. And it is. So there's that. So now, where this one finishes, this one begins. Okay? So there's a couple of things that have to happen here. Number one, this is finishing on the inside. So we actually want this piece right here to finish on the outside. So let's look at params and see and make sure that that is finishing on the outside. It's starting on the inside, so it's probably finishing on the outside, and it does. Excellent. So now so it finishes out here, so when it connects to this one, let's go ahead and add our jump. Okay, excellent. So there's the jump. So we'll go back to point 2. And we'll just pull that in a little bit. And right there, that's fine. So it's going to finish this satin, and then it's going to start the jump stitch to the top, and then it's going to come down and end the satin down here. Okay, which is exactly what we want. Now this one here, we need it to stitch from right to left. That is the next piece to stitch. It is stitching from right to left. So now we need to jump from where the K ends and this begins. But we need to make sure the K ideally is ending on the outside. So let's see what the K is doing in params and see that that in fact is happening. So it's probably not going to end on the outside because it started on the outside. So now what do we do? Well, what if we were to reverse the first rail and swapped rails? And now you can see it's ending on the outside. So we could choose apply and quit. But our running stitch, let's see where it begins. Let's go back into params. Because our running stitch is starting from the outside, but you can see it's starting from the inside now. That's usually how it works. So see how it's starting on the inside, going to the outside? So what that means for us, not a big deal, but this running stitch needs to connect to this corner because that's where it begins, not over here. Okay? Small little tweak. So now we can go from this piece to this piece with a jump. So we'll go ahead and add that. Okay. Now, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to do something a little bit different here. We're not going to add the jump. Let's see. How am I want to do this? Okay, I lied. We do want to add the jump. Only because I don't know if, in this particular instance, if the machine that we're going to be using to embroider this has automatic thread trims. If the machine had automatic thread trims like mine does, then I would not be using a running stitch between these two because of the amount of space there is here. There's a fair bit of space here. So I would have gone ahead and added a thread trim, but I'm not going to do it in this case because I don't know that this machine is capable of doing that. But so those are the necessary steps in any event to when we're using that cut satin to get to the next place that we need to get to. Okay, and so that's why that tool exists primarily. Now, what is an optional way of doing that does not require the cut satin? So here is our duplicate K. This is one piece, and this is one piece. Okay, so another option would be, and this is typically how I do it, is I just come into this first satin column and double click and double click. That adds a node. So we'll go back over here. Okay, so that adds a node. And then where I added those two nodes, I break it. Shift B, and then we hit Shift Control K. Now what that does for us is now we have 4 pieces. So the top rail, Control K, the bottom rail, Control K. Okay, now you see up here, it added rungs to our design. It changed the line thickness. And you can see we had to add the command and then go to a different place to cut the command. It was, to me, that's a little bit of a process. I get so used to doing it this way that it kind of comes second nature to me. But the one drawback to doing it this way is we lose our params altogether. So now we got to go back into params and we got to turn off running stitch. And of course, there's our satin. Okay, so the rest of it is basically the same process. It's just how do we cut the satin? Well, we can manually cut the satin just the way I showed you, and that's the way I usually do it. I don't use the cut satin command. Okay. All right. So now that this is finished, we got to find out where this is ending. I want this to end up top, I believe. So this piece is stitching from left to right, and then I want this to stitch from the bottom and finish up top here. So let's see if we can make that happen. Go into params, see how it's currently stitching. It is stitching from the bottom up. Excellent. So it's going to end up here. So remember, the next piece to begin is this little piece of our F, but we need to make sure it's stitching from right to left. And it is not, so we'll swap the rails, and now it is. So now it's stitching, so we're going to go from here to here with the jump. So you can see this is a whole process over and over and over and over and over again until it's complete. Let's see what it did here. Didn't like something, so we're going from here to here. Let's try that again and hit apply. And you can see it did not give us our jump as intended. Now, when that happens, there's one of two reasons that would happen. A, the distance is not greater than 2 millimeters, which clearly in this case it is, or B, one or the other object has a trim command applied. So let's go to this piece and look at it in params and see if we accidentally applied a trim command at some point. And you can see it does say trim after. So when that happens, it will not allow us to do a jump stitch. So now we'll go ahead and choose apply and quit. So now when we select those two and ask for a jump, it will give us a jump. And notice that we have, it says do not connect after a trim. So we could have turned that off, and even though we had a trim command assigned, it would have still made the connection. But I have those options selected so that I know to go and turn off my trim command. Otherwise, we're not going to know that there was a trim command applied in params. So it's a bit of a give and take there. But that's just how I like to do it. Now, we have another issue here, that this jump is happening from the inside, and of course we want the jump to happen from the outside. So we're going to fix that. But we can go ahead and have it like this for now. And I just like those to happen perfectly horizontally. Because what we'll do is we'll come in and snip that little connector there. But for now, we don't want the machine to stop. We just want to keep rolling on. Okay, so that's why we're doing it that way. All right, so let's look at this piece back in params again and get it so it ends on the outside instead of the inside. You can see here it's starting on the outside, so it's always going to finish on the inside. So what we can do is we can swap the rails and swap the first rail, and that should get us. So it's starting on the inside now, so that means it should finish ding ding on the outside. Okay, and then our jump is starting from the outside and coming over. So now this piece here, this F, we need to stitch from the bottom up because we want that connector to be up top. Don't know which direction it's stitching currently, but it is stitching from the top down, so we'll swap those rails. Now it's coming from the bottom up. And then we know we can make our connector here. So we're going to start from the top down, which of course I'm pretty sure our eye is stitching from the top down. And it is. So now we can make that little connector. So from here to here, and we'll see, it may not give us a connector because that distance might be less than 2 millimeters. Nope, it did go ahead and give it to us. So let's go ahead and choose apply. Now, where the challenge is here is the connector is starting at the bottom, and we don't want the connector starting at the bottom And notice that the connector is coming all the way over to the right. So we kind of have a double whammy here. So we don't want that to actually happen that way. So firstly, we want this to end at the top. So what we'll do, we've got swap rails turned on. You can see it starting from the outside. So now that means it's going to finish on the inside. So what if we were to reverse both rails? Okay, that's not going to work, is it? So what if we reverse the first rail and we turned off swap rails? Now you can see it's stitching from the inside and it will finish on the outside, which is what we need. Then over here, we need this to start on the what I consider the outside. So double check that. And it's starting on the inside. So what if we were to swap the first rail and swap rails? Now you can see it's starting right where we need it to on the outside. So that distance is less than, we know that this satin column is a 1.5 millimeter. That's a shorter distance than the width of this. So if we select those two, we should not get a jump stitch there. So we'll go ahead and hit apply. And you can see it didn't do nothing. I wish it gave us some kind of warning or something, but it just doesn't do anything. So we know that that distance is less than 2 millimeters. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go from where our I ended to where our E begins, but this little piece has to go from right to left. So we'll open that up in params. And it's going left to right, so we'll turn that around. There we go. And then we'll make that connector from I to E. So we'll go ahead and make that connector. There we go, I to E. So we'll go ahead and back that down to 0.2. And we will route our path. Something like that. Tuck this under. There we go. And now that connector is going to happen. Now our E here, like where it connects here to the L, it could connect up top or it could connect at the bottom. If we can, I like my connections at the bottom. That's kind of standard practice. So this is going to stitch from top to bottom. So let's go into params and make sure that is in fact what's happening. And it is. So that part's good. We do need it to end at the bottom. So let's double check that that is ending at the bottom. That'll be our next step to make that connection to our L here. So it's starting on the, what I would call the inside here. So you can see it is in fact stitching on the opposite side. So that is how we want it to be. So now we need a little runner from the inside to where it begins up here. So we'll select those two pieces, hit apply. Excellent. So then this piece here, we will do 0.2. There we go. Okay. So that'll run up and then this will come and stitch down. And now this, we need to start from the top down. So let's double check that that's what's happening. And it is. And where is this going to end? We need it to end at the bottom, and it is. Perfect. So now all we need to do is take from here to here and run up top. So we will go ahead and add our runner. Point 2. double click on our runner here. All right, we'll bring that in a little bit. Bring this in a little bit. And that will become our runner up top there. Okay. And then lastly, we need to go from our L to our D. We know approximately where D is starting. So we will just go ahead and jump it. So there is our runner, point 2. Slide that over, route this over, bring that up a touch, bring this down a touch, and there we go. Okay, so now that has all been routed and pathed into perfection. So now if we go ahead and look at this in simulator mode, pause this momentarily. So let's watch this stitch. So it's going to stitch our T, and then when it finishes our T, it's going to run over to our next portion, and then it's going to run down. See how it ran down? Now notice that this is going at a bit of an angle. Okay? Why is that? Why is it at a bit of an angle? Well, let's look at that, and I'll explain what's happening there. So we have this going straight across. Why is it coming down at an angle? Well, the reason it's coming down at an angle is because this distance is less than 2 millimeters or 2.5 millimeters or whatever this is set in params. So watch this. So let's open up our runner in params, and let's look at what it says here. So the running stitch length is 2.5 millimeters. So that's why it's coming at an angle, because that distance is 2.5 millimeters. Okay. Now, if we change the running stitch to a manual, then it will respect that exact horizontal position, and that's really what I prefer on running stitches. I prefer the running stitches to run as a manual stitch. Now, one of the drawbacks in doing that is, let's look at our needle points. Notice that we have this, we have that huge needle point. So when we do that, we will set our maximum stitch length to 2.5 millimeters. So it's kind of sort of like a running stitch, but not really. But that is the param to add, and so now that will be respected. So like this right here, this runner here could be an issue. We'll go ahead and look at it in simulator mode to see if it is, but we may have to just go ahead and add all of those. So let me just show you what we could do here. Let's look and see if we have another issue first of all in simulator, and I want to show you something. So now you can see how that runner is exactly horizontal. We might have a little bit of an issue right there. I think we have a little issue right here because of where that is on the outside there. Just trying to see if we have a little issue right here. You can see that. So it's not bad, those little issues, but technically speaking, there's one here. So this looks like it's ending on the inside. We got to take a look at that A, where that connection's being made. So let's look at this, because this A really should end on the outside. So that's why that looks a little weird. I didn't catch that previously. So let's look at that A in params. So let's see here. It's starting, and yes, it finishes. So we are not going to swap the rails. We are going to swap the first rail. So now it should end on the outside like we need it to. Perfect. So we'll choose apply and quit. And so then this connector can connect over here and make that connection. Okay. So that's pretty good. And let's go back into simulator mode here. So yes, that looks better. Something is happening up here. This is at an angle, and this is at an angle, and this is at an angle. Okay, and so I don't really like that. And also something is happening weird here with this connection. So, the easiest thing to do to fix that is if we select one of those pieces. It doesn't matter which one. Let's select this one right here. Okay, and then we can go up here to Object, and we can choose to select Similar. I said go to the Object menu. I actually meant go to the Edit menu. So we can come over here to Edit, and then you can see it says Select Same, and then we can do the fill in stroke. You have several options here. You can also just right click on the selected object and you will get the same thing. So you see here it says select same, and then it gives you the options of fill and stroke, and then it selects all of those objects that match that criteria. So select it, right click, select same, fill and stroke. I wanted to try and move all those at once, but it won't let me. So let's do this. Select same, fill and stroke, and then let's grab it right there. And now you can see all those pieces. Now this is different because I don't know why that's different. Maybe it doesn't have the same thickness as all the others. That's probably what it is. So I will shift click on that. And now when we go into params, now we can set the params. We can set everything to be a manual stitch. And some of this was already set to manual. So just as a safety precaution, I go to manual, I go to running, and then go back to manual. It kind of like resets everything. And then we'll do the max stitch length of 2.5. Okay. And so when we do that, we'll go ahead and choose apply and quit. Now this is kind of a weird thing that happens. We're telling it the maximum stitch length is 2.5. That much is true, okay? But the little connector, so like this is what I would call a little connector. Whatever we punched, whatever we manually clicked on, it will respect anything less than 2.5. But if the distance is more than 2.5, then it won't have a stitch longer than 2.5. But unless it's goes against what we had already clicked on. So it's kind of it's weird to say maximum stitch length of 2.5 because that's not entirely true, because this right here is less than 2.5, but it will respect that because it's under manual stitch. Just kind of a weird little anomaly thing. But anyhow, let's go ahead and choose apply and quit. And now let's take a look at what this looks like now. It's a subtle difference. Probably really doesn't matter too much, in all honesty. But you'll see that that connector is perfectly horizontal, perfectly horizontal. Now, this one, we drew that as an angle. But see here, K is straight across, and the ampersand sign is straight across. And this is just because those two letters are slightly different height. But you can see here, respected, respected, respected. This was drawn at a tiny angle. So that's what's happening there. All right. So now if we go into our info box, now you can see we have a single thread jump. If we turn on our frogs, we do have a thread jump right here. And I don't know why. So let's back that up because we shouldn't have any. So what's happening here? Okay, that's what's happening. We did not have a connector from the inside of our F to the outside of our F. And so you can see it made one for us. Boom. So we don't want that. So we'll go in and fix that. I didn't think about that, I guess. I was under the impression that our E was starting from the top. Our E should start from the top. Why is it not starting from the top? It is starting from the top. So now what's happening? So our E finishes, or the inside of our E finishes, and then we have this run stitch, and then our E. What's happening here? So we have this I, and then the inside of our E. That's what's happening. So our layers were a little bit goofed up here. So we have our I, and the next piece that should stitch is the run stitch. So our I is 9, and then our next piece is the run stitch, and then our next piece is the inside of our E, our run stitch. No, that's not the problem either. So 9, 50, 13, 51 to 10. Well, let's see what's happening there. Something's happening there. So let's look at that in simulator mode, I guess. Our I, and then we have our run stitch, and then our F is covering that up. So what's happening here? Apparently our issue is not where I thought it was. So let's go back in there and find out where the connector is. The issue is right here. It is between, it is the F. The problem is the F. So yes, so we want the F to end up top, but we don't have the connector for those two. Okay, I was looking at the wrong thing. So there we go, we'll hit apply. So now we have our connector. So we'll go back to point 2. And we'll double click on our connector here. There we go. So move that over, do something like that. And now we have the proper connection there. And now we won't have that thread jump, there. Back to simulator. Turn on the froggies, and you can see we don't have any. When we go to our info box here, you will see we have no thread jumps. Okay, so now all of that is properly pathed. All of our connections are there, and this distance is so tiny that you won't even probably see that piece of thread. This you probably would, so you go in there and clip it, but the rest of the connections are so tiny you probably wouldn't even see it. So let's do one final looky-loo here. We'll go to Extensions, InkStitch, Visualize, and we'll do the Stitch Plan Preview. And let's go ahead and choose Apply. And there is our finished design. So you see those little tiny connectors between those letters. This one will probably clip, that one will probably clip, and the rest we wouldn't. We'll just leave it as is. Okay? So that is really it. Now, the one thing I do notice here, I do notice this is stitching slightly above that. And I don't know what that is. I don't like that. I don't know what that is. But that should not be like that. This, a lot of times I will come in here and really scrutinize things. I can see where my connectors are, certain things that I like or don't like. I don't know. Same thing here. See that there? How that's like on top? That shouldn't necessarily be like that. See how it's not on top over here? It's just there. So little tiny things like that. We could possibly look at what's happening here. And I want to look at what's happening here, and I want to look at what that is. So let's go ahead and delete that. First of all, what's happening here? This is, so we're going to go back that off. And now you'll see that this was inside of where it finished, and that's why it was acting the way it was acting. So we're going to fix that. And then what was our other issue? Something's happening right here. Let's look at how this is stitching. Let's look at all of this. So something is happening right there. Don't know exactly what's happening, but let's look at that. So this is our K, and our K is coming over. Oh, see there? That's what's happening. There's a little jump to our next segment. See that? So that's what's happening, that little thread jump. So we don't want that to happen. So let's rethink this then. Let's rethink this. So that's our running stitch. It's connecting to that. All right, so let's back up here. So there is our K, and then our run stitch. So K is path 26. Our run stitch is path 44, and you can see 26, 44. And then the next piece is this horizontal piece. But I think I want to change that now, and I think I want this piece to stitch. So our horizontal is path 6, but I think I want path 30 to stitch instead. Okay? So that means that this run stitch is going to have to change to something like that. Okay, so that's our new run stitch. So let's just double check that I want to see where this path, or yeah, this satin, I want to see how which direction it stitches. So let's go into params here. If it starts on the inside or the outside, that's what I want to know. It starts on the inside, okay, which is fine. But then our connecting line needs to be over here. Okay, so that's going to connect right there. Beautiful. So this is path 44, and then path 30, and then when path 30 finishes, where is path 30 going to finish? So because we need to connect right here. We need the path 30 to finish somewhere around here so we can connect to this piece. And this piece is going to stitch from, we'll need it to stitch from left to right. So let's make sure it's going to do that. These are all just little tiny things, you know. So we'll go ahead and make sure it's stitching from left to right. And it's ending at the bottom. Let's go ahead and swap our first rail then. and not swap rails, and then it should stitch up top and up top, which it does. So that takes care of that. And then I want the I want this to end somewhere. So I think what we're going to do is we'll just end it right here. So we're going to take that and this, and we'll break it there. Okay. And then, remember, we're going to Shift Control K. That's going to split it up into 4 pieces. We've got 2 top rails, Control K, 2 bottom rails, Control K. Okay. And then we will go ahead and reset those. So the top here, we want it to stitch from the right down, essentially. So let's go ahead and look at that. And it's stitching. We'll go ahead and turn that into satin. So it's stitching in the opposite direction we need it to, so we could swap the rails. So that takes care of that. And then this, we need to stitch from the right to left. So we will undo that. And it is stitching right to left. Excellent. So let's look at that again and make sure if it's starting on the left or right side, though. So it's starting on the right, which is fine, but then our path has to go back over there to connect it right there. All right, so that's taken care of. So it's going to come up, and then we need a run stitch from this piece to this piece. So we'll go ahead and add that in there. Okay, so there is our little runner. Let's go back over here to point 2. And so this is starting on the outside, and which this, oh, okay, yeah. So this is finishing, and then this is not what I expected. What's going on here? So it's ending over here, and then this piece. Let's hit apply. I think I grabbed the wrong piece is what happened. I must have. No. Not sure what's happening here. Let's look at how this is stitching again. So it should be stitching. Yes, so it's starting over here and ending over here. So that part's correct. So let's look at our layers palette. Maybe our layers palette's messed up here. So 30, and then it should be 35, 55. That's what it was. Those two were just reversed. Devil's in the details, but usually when something crazy like that happens, that's why. So now we can hit apply. Then we must have a thread parameter set on one of those pieces or both, because it won't let us add a jumper. So it's not that one. Let's double check the params on this one. Nope. So there is no thread command there. So why is it not giving us 30 and 55? Why is it not giving us a jump? It's being difficult. It is not giving us a jump. And I'm not entirely sure why. So I have had that happen a time or two. So we can just do it manually. That's fine. But it is a little weird. So it is a little strange. All right, so if we want to, you can see here we have this. If I grab my eyedropper tool and just shift click on this, uh, it will, basically what I want to do is I want to copy the properties from this. What is this dashed line? It is that one. All right, so we'll just do it that way. It is this one. This one. I'm not sure what's going on there. It doesn't really matter that these two match, but you know, I guess they should. All right, so now let's just double check and let's go into simulator mode here and make sure all that is going to stitch properly. Okay, so we do have an issue here. And that is probably going to have to do with our runner. Yes, because our runner is not in the right spot. Because we added it, but our runner needs to be after 30. And it's right up top right now. So we'll come down here. That needs to be between 30 and 55. And now we should get our results that we expect. Now, there is one other thing here that I did notice. We've got a thread jump that we don't want. So first of all, this piece has to end on what I'm going to call the inside or the right. And it doesn't. You can see here, I don't believe it does anyhow. It does not. It ends on the left. So what we need to do is swap the first rail without swapping rails. And now you can see it does end on the inside. And then this one has to begin at the top left. So we'll look at that. And it doesn't. So let's choose automatic and swap rails. And now you can see it does stop top left. Okay? So now there won't be no thread jump in between those two. So a lot of little things to consider. But there we go. Coming around the bend here. It's going to do that part. Run up. Finish there and then start. Yes. All right. All of that just so we can, let's go into our stitch plan preview. So we can look at the stitches one more time. Now, was I being nitpicky there? Yes, but really I just wanted to show you some things that you can do so it all makes a little bit more sense. But now you can see here, this piece is neatly tucked under. Everything else is coming along nicely. Now, I don't know what's happening here. Gonna have to look at that. Oh, I do know what's happening there. Okay. So, but over here, notice that that little connector stitch is not on top of our satin over here. So that's what we want. But yes, I do know what's happening here. So no worries, we're going to fix that. So let's go ahead and delete that. So what's happening there is we were ending up here, but now we're ending down here. So this connector needs to come down to something like that, to the next one. Now I don't know if this is ending at the top or bottom, so we should look at that in params. It is ending at the bottom. So what if we don't swap rails, but then we swap the first rail? and then it's ending at the top. Okay, so that's where the next one begins. So there we go. So now we have the proper connection there. So let's look at that one more time. Let's make sure that is in the right order in our layers palette. So that finishes 6, and then yes, 48. That is the next piece. All right, so that part of it is set right. So let's go ahead and go back into our stitch plan preview here. All right, so now, yes, now you can see we have a nice connector there, just like we expected, and everything else is correct. So we are finally done. Done. So what we'll do here is let's go ahead and hit File and Save As. Now, if you want this little piece of text, just drop us an email. Our email address is in the listing description below. And just say, hey, could I have the track and field text? And we'll be happy to send you the InkScape file. Now, this could be easily increased in size. Not so much easily decreased in size, but we could make this bigger if you wanted to, just by dragging it out. The main thing is that satin column. Once that satin column gets past, say, 4 millimeters wide, then we would want to go in and add some underlay. But otherwise, you could scale it up, definitely. So and now we're going to hit File and Save As. Now we're going to save it as an embroidery file. Okay, so we're going to look for our embroidery format, which in this case was DST. Now I don't save a lot to DST, so I have to find it. I use the PES format. There it is, right there. The old standard Chijima format, track and field DST. There we go. All right. So I will send the individual who asked for the video, I will send them the InkScape file and the DST file for their embroidery machine so they can finally get this embroidered out for their grandson. But anyhow, that's the process. So you can see this was a kind of a tedious process, and it is. It just is. But if you can get past that, you know, they say time is money. So I would definitely recommend, like, if you are digitizing day in and day out, I would definitely not recommend doing it in InkStitch. I'd go buy one of those programs. I'd probably buy Hatch, or there's another software called Drawings that's really good. Chroma, I've watched the videos on Chroma. That's pretty good software. So, I mean, there's lots of different options, and they're all roughly priced the same in that $1,000 category. And then there's another program called SoWet Pro that people swear by, but I have not checked that out yet. But it's only like $65. But people say it's really good software. But for InkStitch, that's how you do it. And it don't cost you a dime. It just costs you a little bit of time. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that one and learned a little something. Thanks for watching.